we'll try again with greeting each other. And so folks online, it's so weird. I'm looking at you in the camera, but actually your photos on a little TV here are facing the audience portion of the class. So Joichi, I think, is going to pan the camera over. So you are now kind of looking where your faces are pointed. Man, this is such a weird world. And so the plan is, if everyone online could type into the chat board and just write your name and where you're watching from tonight. And if there are two of you, you can put both your names. And then Joichi will read out everyone's, what you've written in the chat bar. And when your name is said, you can wave, jump up and down, throw confetti in the air, whatever you like, to sort of draw attention to yourself and show who you are. So maybe while that's all getting organized, we can start with saying our names in the room here. So I can start, and then we'll just go next to Kyle and kind of go in a circle around from there and make it through everyone. So Genjo. Genjo. Kyle. Aaron. Ciara. Wendy. Cindy.
Holly.
Yoan.
Joichi. And we have Pam in Eugene. Pam. Mandy from Springfield. Arya in Eugene. Louise in Elkton. Clara and Shadow in Baja, Mexico.
Clara and Shadow in Baja, Mexico.
James in Eugene. Dave and Gabe. Gayla in San Francisco. Rincho in Walla Walla, Washington. Daniel and Helena. Great. That's them. And Mandy.
Two Mandys?
Oh, maybe I doubled Mandy.
Oh, you got doubled Mandy.
Great.
That were good, I thought. Nice. Yeah, that feeling of connection, I think, is so special. I was reflecting on that today. I got to go have an hour-long conversation with my teacher and talk about the Buddha Dharma. And it's so easy just to not live with a certain kind of sincerity that I think these teachings are calling us to. And I think in one sense, in Zen Buddhism, we're not always encouraging people to talk about things. It's kind of like if you have to go have a conversation or sit quietly and face a wall, you should probably go sit quietly and face a wall is kind of the general instruction. But I think you can also miss something if you think that this has to just be something profound and private and your own little secret thing. It should also really be shared and nurtured in community. So in this weird world, we will try and do that as best we can. So thank you for playing along, and I think that experiment went pretty well. Any other questions in the nuts and bolts categories of things? We sort of figured out maybe how to greet each other. That's nice. Are things on Zoom okay? Any complaints? You could direct towards Joichi. I mean, he's doing a fantastic job, I think we could say.
Thanks, Joichi.
Yeah. And also Joichi is also doing all of the editing and getting those out to everyone so quickly, so. Yay! Great. Well, I think we'll dive into homework then. So, as I remember assigning it, I was asking people if they'd investigate what it was like to kind of discern or reflect that you were kind of hanging out in a particular realm, in the wheel of rebirth that we've been talking about, and then to make, I like these words I use, a leap of the compassionate and imaginative heart. A leap of the compassionate and imaginative heart, and offer what you think that being is really looking for at that point. There can oftentimes be a kind of surface level situation going on, and we're biting into that kind of narrow view of the world. But what is it like to stop and kind of be like, what are you really looking for? What are you really looking for? And talk to the belly of that being. Maybe I'll share real quickly my own exploration there. Many of you have probably been outside, at least if you're in Eugene. The weather here has been gorgeous. I don't know about elsewhere in the world. So I got up to a bike ride, and at some point I realized I was kind of driving a kind of joy and power of being on the bike and zooming past people. Joichi might have these experiences sometimes too. Someone's also riding their bike, but you like fly past them and you're like, oh yeah, like I'm going so fast. And trying to be mindful of everyone, but really like kind of riding this little like power edge. And finally at some point, feeling this kind of nagging feeling about that, not really looking at it directly, and also feeling a lot of joy and energy, and my blood's pumping. And finally I was like, oh, what's going on? What's really going on here? And so I just decided to pull over, like right where I was. And I was next to a bridge and the river, and I just, tilted over the bike, laid it down, and sat on the grass for a bit. And I just stopped. And it was so lovely. And I just realized that weird driving anxiety was coursing through me, and that wasn't very nice. It was accompanied by lots of other pleasurable things, but it was kind of this mixed bag of discomfort in there. And I got to settle into something more immediately kind of beautiful and fragile and particular, rather than just that kind of self-centered view. So that was that was one instance of that for me, and I really appreciated the homework. And maybe before we share, I wanted to encourage people that it can be really easy. We're in class 4, I think, to settle in into a kind of groove of who tends to speak and who tends to not speak. And so if you've been coming forward quite a bit, maybe just kind of reflect on that a bit, and maybe hold back and create some space. And if you've been kind of holding back, maybe feel encouraged to come forward and share your perspectives. And with that, I'll open up the floor. Yoan?
I kind of use my emotional mind state representing the wheel, and there's been lots of examples this week that I've had different feelings, but we'll just pick anger because it's kind of a easy example, and just say it's okay that you feel that way, about all the different emotions, but say anger, for example. I don't want to feel that way. I don't like feeling that way, and I would prefer to just say, oh, I don't feel like that. I just, push it away. But what happens when I say, oh, it's okay that you feel that way, I don't have to act in the way that I might have if I was separating myself from that emotion. And it opens up other opportunities, to be compassionate to people I'm angry with, which was really surprising to me. I did something really nice for somebody I really don't like. I won't go into detail, but and it was a very strange feeling. And I would not have done that if I hadn't been reflecting on that emotion and accepting it just as it is, without judgment or pushing away. So I thought that was really interesting. Thank you.
Maybe we'll try and shoot for 2 more.
I've got something I could share. I live with 3 other roommates, and 2 of them I tend to kind of worry about. And so just working on realizing what is actual and what is more of a personal like worry that doesn't need to be there. Yeah, just sort of realizing that more and more each day when something sort of tends to bother me in whatever the situation is. Just realizing a better way to feel about things there. And so I suppose that could be animal realm or something. Kind of, yeah, just straightforward, raw, immediate feeling, reactive kind of. So I feel like I'm making progress there, I guess, at the same time.
Yeah. Am I hearing that there's kind of like, it used to just be kind of a general flavor of worrying, and now when you're with bringing more of a reflective heart to it, it's like there are different kind of colors of intention around that worry?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
That fits the, thank you.
Yeah. I feel like I run that, I have some level of responsibility for keeping this place going and managing or helping organize how the rituals go. And sometimes I'll just have annoyance about how something is happening. And sometimes it'll be like, oh, this is actually really important for how we all function. And it can get really dicey, especially when those overlap. And so it can be some kind of catharsis wielding of power, or it can be an intention of trying to better the community or help the person who might even be making some kind of mistake. To say like, oh, that's just not how we do it, and it can be confusing in this way, or can have this kind of problem with it. But to be really clear about the intention changes everything on that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
I can go. You can hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah. Is that Arya?
Yeah. I was visiting Portland in the last week and noticing on one day, especially in particular, I was having all this grasping energy around like wanting to do things because I was in the city and wanting to like get tea here and get like a meal here and like kind of this like unstoppable, it felt like a little bit of a hungry ghost energy, like wanting the right thing that's going to bring me pleasure, that's going to bring me joy. And then I was realizing that none of it was satisfying me. And so I was thinking about how we were talking of the medicine for that realm being generosity sometimes. So once I was actually able to pause and think about that, I realized that I should just go and I ended up going home and like making some salve for my friends to give to them. And it was like a much better way to spend my afternoon than driving all over the city, like buying tea. So that was good medicine.
Oh, no, that's wonderful. Thank you. Oh, that's great. Thank you everyone for sharing. All right, well, I think we'll jump into some new material, and I'll start with kind of rehashing with where I felt we left off last week. So I introduced what was called the 4 seals of the law, And that was really just an extension of how we'd been hammering home the ideas of no self and of impermanence. And then there were, and I won't recapitulate those now, but the other two aspects that make up these four seals of the law, or kind of the four marks or kind of aspects of Buddhist teaching that make them Buddhist teaching, those were dukkha, so that all conditioned phenomena, selves, experiences are unsatisfying. And in many ways, one is that they're compounded, there are different phenomena that come together, and if they come together, it means they fall apart. And then also, I was thinking about that a little bit more, because I don't know, sometimes that doesn't fully connect with me, because sometimes I feel pretty satisfied having certain experiences. But another way I was thinking about it is that life, reality, self, and things are profoundly and unstable, right? So that comes from no self and impermanence. And when I have a belief or a need, I'm compelled to have some kind of reliance on things. It's accompanied by an anxiety and a kind of fear that I'm needing to insist on a particular kind of view, right? There's something unstable there that's like, well, I'm not feeling so good about this, let me latch onto something being a certain way, right? So there's this anxiety that can drive us towards taking up particular views or striving towards particular experiences. And the last one of those seals is nirvana. And that word means something like to go out, to be blown out, like a candle. And it's also really closely associated with another word, nirodha, which means cessation or cooling. And that's the word that's, often interchangeably used for with awakening, liberation, and freedom in a Buddhist sense. So once again, we're sort of like pausing on the whole liberation front and sort of hanging out in the suffering realm. So we'll talk more. My plan for the rest of the course is to next week to talk more about path and liberation, and then maybe in the last class, the sixth class, to mostly just have question and answer and more lively discussion. So pause on why Nirvana is tranquil, although I think you're probably getting a number of clues about that along the way, which is part of the goal. So Nirvana is tranquil, dukkha, and no self and impermanence, the four seals of the law. And so all of these are represented in the wheel, right? So if you want to pull out the wheel image right here, you can if you feel inspired. Otherwise, you probably have heard these many times. This scary fellow and the mirror are pointing at no self and impermanence. You know? No self and impermanence. And that looks quite frightening to beings that want to know how to conquer the world or be okay or avoid suffering and impermanence. It doesn't look like a good thing. The six realms are dukkha and samsara. Those are themselves the sort of images or, the actualities of our heart that appear as we're running from no self and impermanence. Those are the ways those tend to manifest, or that we could say those are the archetypal patterns we might take up in our own mind in relationship with objects. And lastly, nirvana is all the Buddhas hanging out in each realm. And the Buddha, this isn't depicted on the image many of you use, but the Buddha that's to the top right as you're facing it, there's a Buddha up there who's often pointing across the way, and there's a bright full moon. And that's the full moon's kind of a classic symbol of awakening in that it's always up there whether we can see it or not. Even if the sky might be full of clouds, the moon is still up there and it's still bright and round, but we might not always perceive it. And also, I know many of you are plugged into Buddha Eye in many more ways than just this class. And Ejo read a short parable from the Lotus Sutra this past Sunday. So that story, I'll just say it real quickly here. There's an old, very rich father. He has many children. It's kind of unclear how many. And he has this big mansion, but it's kind of decaying and falling apart and very scary inside. I imagine like nails sticking up and kids are stepping on them and like falling through the floor, getting lost in weird places. So all kinds of tragic things are happening. And he's like, this is not good to begin with. And then further, it catches fire, and the whole thing is like rapidly going up in flames. And he's like, kids, get out, get out. It's not safe. But they're like, Dad, we're playing, come back later. They're like, oh, funny joke. But it's really serious. And so he tells a little fib, or he tells them that, actually it's not a fib, these carts are outside. He says they're your favorite playthings. You really like carts, like trolleys or carriages. And one is pulled by an ox, one's pulled by a deer, one's pulled by a goat. I know you really, really, really like these things. And they're like, oh boy. And so they run straight out of the house and they find the carts. And in fact, they get carts better than their wildest dreams. It's a white ox, and it's big and powerful and beautiful. So that was the story in a nutshell. And also we find that these are some of the symbolism in here is pointing to the same things we've been talking about. So the mansion is samsara. The mansion is exactly said to be these wheels. We're totally fascinated as living beings with these realms and thinking that we can win the game in there. We can have fun. We're biding our time. It's great. I know the up roads and I know the down roads, and I can make my living in this little hamster cave. But someone has a perspective of that, and it's the Buddha who's outside pointing at the moon, and also very aware of the suffering, the instability of everything going on in there. And one image I read, or at least this was in an early sutra in the Buddhist canon, there's a heavenly being who's talking with the Buddha, and he's very distraught actually, because so it was a young man, or it would be a young deva, who's a man, and he was playing with these beautiful deva women in this garden, and they were all hanging out and like playing hide and seek, it was very just like disconnected and happy. And then one of the young like maidens, like her body starts to go, her light of her being starts to fade, and she starts to get like sweaty, and then she falls through the earth and disappears. And he's like really distraught by this. And he's like, Buddha, what happened and what's going on? And he says, oh, you've been living this extravagant lifestyle as a heavenly God, and you forgot about suffering and impermanence, and this happens to all beings. And he says, you should straight away begin to practice and contemplate impermanence so that you don't suffer the same fate. Or at least you're prepared when that happens, and you can move through these realms with more ease and clarity when that happens. So I thought that was just a really kind of shocking image that makes me think about heavenly realms a little bit differently. And I don't know, when my buddies and I are up playing chess at 11:30 at night, sometimes we'll be like, okay, I'm in the heavenly chess realm right now. I need to remember that tomorrow morning will come and I will have a headache and I should go to bed. So, anywho, a little aside there. So I just wanted to point that out, that you can have your eye out for those four seals and all sorts of teaching and be weaving that network together in your brain. And so a few points I made about the mirror just at the end of last week was that we can use it just as a tool of reflection, just to stop, be like, where am I, what's going on? And that word reflect, the Latin word, I believe it means something like to bend back, the root of that word, to bend back, to, arc backwards. And so in that sense, I think that's a great imagery for what is actually happening there in that moment. We're always, there's kind of oftentimes an image of our mind. Our mind is just, you can imagine a hand and an arm coming out from your mind. It's just grabbing onto thing after thing after thing after thing. What do I want? What will make me happy? And once you stop and reflect, the hand just relaxes, and we can ask, this isn't about objects anymore, is it? What's more to the core there? And then also, this image can be a direct kind of instruction or allegory for how we can see the world. That maybe we can surmise that someone who's deeply invested in practice, the kind of actuality of their heart, mind, world might really be something like this mirror, right? Not all of the beings at once, but realizing that a certain quality takes over and a certain Buddha or medicine can appear, and then that fades. Same thing happens again. And once there's a realization that we're in a certain realm, okay, where's the Buddha for that realm? Where's the Buddha for that realm? Where's the Buddha for that realm? that can be a kind of refrain that we're doing in our own heart all the time. And so from there, what's interesting with this particular class is we sort of jumped ahead in the beginning, really hanging out with this mirror before talking about what's usually kind of the most foundational teaching in Buddhism, which was actually given pretty much directly after the Buddha attained enlightenment, which was the Four Noble Truths. And we popped into these last week a little bit, and we'll flesh them out a little bit further. But so I mentioned that this kind of diagnosis of the situation is the way that diseases were talked about and the cure was offered. So right, there's the symptom, there's the cause of the symptom, there's the cure, and there's the cause of the cure. So suffering is the symptom, the arising or the cause of the suffering is craving and grasping. The cure is cessation of the suffering, to reduce that. I still find that amazing that it's not happiness. It's really just the quieting, the softening of that suffering. And then the cause of that is path or marga. So there's a diet, there's an exercise program for that situation. And I really enjoyed Thich Nhat Hanh. How many people have read Thich Nhat Hanh? Does anyone know who this fellow is? A wonderful man. He's still, I don't know if many people know this, but he's very elderly, and I believe he no longer has the ability to talk. He suffered a pretty severe stroke a number of years ago, but he's back in Vietnam at his home temple, and people say that you can still tell that his spirit is very much alive. So just like plant that in people's consciousness. They say he still smiles really beautifully. He talked about this as, he translates suffering as ill-being and cessation as well-being. I think that's really just sweet and beautiful. And he also talked about how as soon as the Buddha came out with saying there was ill-being, this really implied the entirety of the Four Noble Truths. If there's ill-being, we can look around. We're going to talk a lot about cause and effect tonight. We see anything, we know that forces went into making something the way it was. So if we say there's ill-being, that means there's a cause. And if we say there's ill-being, that means there must be such a thing as well-being. And that must also have a cause. So there's another wonderful place of, everything in Buddhism is just completely interconnected all the time. It's almost exhausting how many connections you can be making all the time. In one way we talked about path. So path here is traditionally, when this path is pointing to what's called the Eightfold Path, which many people will have heard of, and we'll talk about that more in the next class. But another way we can think about that is greed, hate, and delusion happen to be, the center point in this wheel, the really core driving force of samsara or dukkha. And a classic way the path is talked about is generosity, compassion, and wisdom, kind of the direct antidotes for those. So that's a nice point. In another way, we could just think of, if we think of any being, what is its full functioning and what does it need? So Thich Nhat Hanh used the example of an orange tree. So an orange tree, what is it up to when it's going really well? It produces oranges, really lovely oranges, and that means it's in the appropriate place, the appropriate climate, it's getting the appropriate nutrients. And if it's not doing so well, what do its oranges look like? Maybe it's not producing any oranges. Maybe they're kind of wrinkled and kind of gnarly, And I think that's a really great image to think about the human being. What is a full functioning human being? And what is the fruit of a human life? What kind of fruit is possible? And within here, there's really one central thing that, maybe there's lots of central things, but there's an obvious, I mentioned cause and effect. So there's an obvious connection between cause and effect and how this whole thing works. It seems to rely almost completely on that. And so there's quite a bit of Buddhist teaching underlying that, and that's this term karma, which many people have heard. So tonight we are going to talk quite a bit about karma. What is this cause and effect? And in one sense, this is very, very simple. It's almost like, it means just deceivingly, wondrously simple. But human life isn't. If it was just this simple, we'd all be enlightened, bang, boom, take care of this baby. But this cause and effect has some quite nuanced aspects that if we look into them a little bit deeper, I think it can provide some pretty immediate instruction for what unfolding these truths can look like. So, karma. In kind of popular culture, we often have been told it's this sort of cosmic retribution system. So if you're a jerk to someone, then you try and cross the street and get hit by a bus, that's your karma. It's your karma. I actually had a funny situation. I lingered in a bookstore longer than I should have while I was out on an errand this past a couple days ago. And then as I was coming home, some guy rear-ended me. It was all totally fine. It was just a scratch on the car, but I was like, oh no, it's my karma. And I was like, wait, that's not the right teaching of karma. It's like, this is just a total accident. There's no karma here. So that's funny. It's quite different than that idea of just a cosmic retribution system. And so the idea is fairly complicated in some ways, and it's made further complicated by so many religious groups. So in East Asia and the kind of religious ecosystem that we tend to call Hinduism, because we don't have a better word, and as Westerners we're not able to deal with that ambiguousness of that ecosystem of religions in India. Karma means many different things, and in fact what really makes Buddhism is the Buddha's understanding of karma as different, contrasting to other ideas of karma in the time. So I won't get into that now, but that's sort of there, and which really makes sense because karma is really talking about the fulcrum of agency, and really the idea of agency is so central to religious practice. If we don't have any agency to change anything, there's nothing to do. You have to have a belief in some kind of, agency. I can't think of a better word. A belief in a better world, a better self, less suffering, and a way to enact that. And so I think that the central, maybe in all religions, that's kind of the point. What's your relationship with God? Is it grace or is it good works? What's the combination of those? How do you have to understand those to be like really activate the juice of that particular mode of salvation? So kind of fun to think about there. And so karma, if you hear people talking about karma, you can almost be certain that you have different ideas of what that is. So that's a good disclaimer right there. And so Buddhism, well, the word karma really just means cause and effect. It means action, and then within that there are two other terms that mean the action part of karma and the effect part of karma. And so oftentimes it'll just be kind of summed up as cause and effect, but it's really concerned with volition. And in Buddhism, and probably in other of these Hindu religious conglomerations that are out there, there are said to be 5 different sort of orders of cause and effect, including the physical realm. So right, Newton's realm, I push something, there's very clear cause and effect there. Also hereditary and biological realms. So, there's cause and effect there. Seasonal changes, right? There's cause and effect we can view everywhere. And yet this isn't really said to be a potent place for the Buddhist aspirant. Really, it's in the volitional quality of our being. We always are carrying some kind of intention forward, moment after moment after moment. And we'll look a little bit more fully in a minute at all the different kind of aspects of a human that have been laid out or analyzed under a Buddhist microscope. But volition is said to be the place that's where you have the key of liberation in there. And so volition can further be broken down into 3 parts, into thought, speech, and action. right? That's a kind of framework to hold any kind of movement or volition you move out into the world. It's through those. And even if, I think that's really interesting if you are sitting quietly, like we tend to do here now and again, you're enacting your volition all the time. And you become very aware of that, because as you stop moving the body, you'll feel very directly the movement of the mind. So, and then in terms of talking about the kinds of volition, it's actually quite a simple little list. There's good, there's bad, and there's mixed. There are things that are both good and bad. And then there's one we won't really touch much today, because it really refers to path, the kind of, more karma that's really concerned with ending karma. It's a little complicated or counterintuitive. The good, the bad, and the mixed really make sense. But then there's karma that ends karma. Karma that ends karma, but we'll bracket that one for now. So good karma, generosity, kindness, compassion, really energies directed towards helping yourself and others, right? Maybe helping a whole group situation at times. Your mind's eye is focused beyond just the locus of your own comfort. Yeah, that becomes the place where you pour your energy into lifting the boat for everyone, so to speak. The bad karma is where that narrows to just yourself. That's stinginess, meanness, violence, dominance. These things where you're just taking care of your own sensations and feelings, or trying to at least. Really trapped in your self-view. And then mixed, really actually most of our energies hang out in this realm. So oftentimes...
Can we call it the ugly, just so we have...
The ugly, I know, right? The bad and the ugly. There's definitely ugly in there, though. You don't have to worry about that. So the mixed, oftentimes we're really intending for something to be good, but it carries all sorts of kinds of graspings or hoping for a result. It's still caught in a view, and it's not open to receiving and accepting whatever comes, or learning quickly from our own mistakes or short-sightedness. So even in our times of often trying to be really helpful and do the right thing, there's almost always a little bit of posturing, a little bit of grasping, a little bit of self-interestedness in hoping that, someone will get your back later. Who was I talking with? I think it might have been Cindy or Holly after class once, the kind of fun about in Kyogen Carlson, in the book we're reading, he talks about how people, they're like, well, I was really nice to you last week. Wait, aren't you going to be nice to me now? And just how often we can have these subtle layers, or maybe not so subtle layers, of hoping to receive something in return. So, which I really enjoy that the Dalai Lama, he really doesn't begrudge that. He'll term that enlightened self-interest. That's really a good step. We should really mostly learn how to take this, and not really begrudge that part of ourselves. So it can be really easy to get quite severe. But yeah, sweetness towards people and hoping for something in return. Not the best, and be aware to learn from where that has serious downfalls. But also don't begrudge giving kindness when you can, even when it has this kind of less wholesome aspect to it. So a little food for thought there. So maybe before we discuss karma further, let's go to looking at a little diagram that I've offered people. I think everyone online, you have received an email from me. Everyone in person, I printed these off, but I forgot to bring them in here, so I'm going to go get those now. So folks online, you can pull that up.
I like taking notes.
Right. Joey, you'll have to go with that. I know.
Just everywhere.
It's hilarious. It really endeared me to
I like it.
the circle of death. Which also in Buddhism also just really means life. So you can do a little translation in your head. Death. So this actually relates directly to images you've spent quite a bit of time with, whether you know it or not. This is the wheel, the very edge of the wheel of life. But on the pictures you have been looking at, it just has images, and this is the teachings that they're corresponding to, or I guess the verbal representation of that. Oh man, did I print that out? And I printed out further explanations of that, which I did not bring either. But you can start looking at that, and if you have your wheel of life, you can start matching those up to each other.
So this is, yeah. So this is ignorance, right? It's like a grown man. Yeah. Okay. And this is a pot. This is like someone making pottery. Because so when you look in these moving parts, we look at it talks about it as a predisposition. That's something that's preformed.
Okay, thank you all for hanging in there with me. So I don't even know if I said what this is called. This is called the 12-link chain of dependent origination. I've practiced very hard saying that. The 12-link chain of dependent origination. So we can think of, there are all sorts of connections and interrelationships happening in here. And we can say that they're over kind of varying time scales. And this is the very moment-to-moment functioning of a human being, you could say, who's spinning in the wheel of samsara. These are all the things that are at work, right? So it's breaking down all these aspects of human consciousness. And furthermore, this 12-link chain of dependent origination corresponds to that black and white wheel surrounding the hog, the cock, and the snake. So those greed, hate, and delusion. And this is karma. That wheel represents karma. The fact that all throughout life we are having this sensation going up, making it to the top. Things are going good, a sensation of rising, of figuring things out. Things are going good, everything's going my way, wind's at my back. And then we have the sensation of falling. We have the sensation of kind of loss of grace, heading down, watching the world fall apart. I don't know how many people have, I'm guessing everyone, you know, when you just, everything is going so well, and then a really significant piece of your life just gets shattered. I almost I've actually come to kind of fear or really question or pause on that feeling when I'm like, yes, it's all so good. And it feels really important. It's almost the Buddha kind of playing a tune that says, be careful. This won't last. How do you take care of the things? How do you take care of this world when it's constantly falling apart? It'll look like this for a while, but don't take things for granted. Don't take things for granted. So, right, karma, this wheel, the rising and falling, and then the wheel on the very edge, I guess it's not a wheel, it's just the edge of the mirror, is this 12-link dependent chain of origination. So it usually starts, it's said to start up here with ignorance. So, right, and I'll actually just go through and read kind of further descriptions of all of these, along with I'll read out what the image is, and I'll send out what I'm going to read later in an email. So that first one for ignorance is a blind woman. This first link of ignorance represents ignorance. That wasn't a very good one. I think we get that imagery. The second one is a potter. And this here is called conditional conditioning on this particular image I've handed out to people, but it's also referred to as mental formations. And so it says, because the potter forms a shape out of a clay, setting it into motion. So the vessel gets set at a certain point. Very early on in our cognizing of anything, the kind of shape and energy and like kind of lay of where energies can even go with our perception gets laid very early in our kind of cognitive perception of anything. Next is consciousness, and that's a monkey. And it can represent primitive consciousness forming. So really, there's something that can perceive something, right? So the screen turns on, in a sense. And that's why it's the first of this next kind of chunk that's all there. And so names and formations, or what is this here? Name and form. So basically an idea that objects can exist, right? And they can be known, they can be separate from me. That's represented by people sailing in a boat. And you know what? I'm not sure why that image is there.
It's the four, whatever, of form, sensation, thought, and volition.
Oh, nice. It's the aggregates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these, I didn't mention these in this class, but those are said to be the kind of lumps of that make up human consciousness. Can you say them again, Holly?
Form, sensation, thought, and volition.
Yeah, there it is. So basically, those different realms of experience appear for us, and then the six sense bases, or basically perception, or eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Those are the 6 sense gates in Buddhism, and that's a house with 6 windows on it. So next we have contact, and that's an embracing amorous couple. And really is kind of showing the deep connection of something. Very sensate, very sensual, kind of commingling of things. Next we have feeling, and this image is just so intense. It's an arrow piercing the eye. And in some images, it's so wild. The arrow has like gone all the way through the head. You can see the arrow coming out through the back right there. Usually the person's there holding it. And for me, I just think it really points to the fact that your vision is gone. Like there's just something so intimate. There's just powerful sensation that lacks any kind of vision or intention of what you can do with it or where you can go with it. It's just totally smushed up against you. And then the next one, I guess this is 8 for craving. And that's someone's drinking alcohol. And so clinging to the pleasures and addictions which result from feeling. So, and that one is put in the sense of greed, but that can also be, you have a sense of feeling and you're trying to get away from it, right? And that, I think maybe in drinking alcohol, that's a pretty good example. Because in one sense, you're going towards maybe a good feeling, but you're also pretty clear to most of us, you might also be running from a bad feeling at the same time, which we're doing with all sorts of activities again and again and again, but that's an easy target. The next one for attachment or grasping is a monkey reaching for a piece of fruit. So there's going for it, basically. And then what do we have next? 10 is becoming, and the picture is a pregnant woman. So and really this is all the intention of that section here in the present causes. First you have an image of thinking you can get away from something. You have the image of what that looks like. You have the moment of grasping, where there's really a decision to go for it. And then you feel and move into that feeling of change that's there. And that's all, it's very difficult to actually break all of this up in time because it happens so quickly. It's said in Buddhism that nen, and this is, I guess, through the Japanese Zen tradition, a nen is 1/65th of the snap of a finger. So it said this entire cycle is happening 65 times in that. It's kind of amazing. Pretty ridiculous. I sometimes just wonder if that's a tool to shoot for the stars and you'll hit the moon. So it's like you'll really never get there, but if you shoot for that, you'll become much more aware of your body and what's in mind and what's going on. So next we have birth. Someone's a woman is giving birth to a child, and then death, dying. It's a person dying on a rock, slumped on a rock. The loneliness of dying and death. That's what this great sheet says. And so in a sense, right, we have that process, we have that sense of change that has been grasped for, that has been kind of calculated and really hoped for. And then as soon as we cognize or have a feeling that that's happened, it means that it's going to go away. So almost that birth and death happen they're smushed up right into each other. So there's a lot there. And I don't have a firm grasp on how all that fits together, and there's tons of different interpretations out there, but there are some really key things we can get with even a rudimentary grasp of that situation. So we have these 1, 2, 3, and 4 sections there, which kind of have, people might have been wondering a little bit about those. So past causes, present results, present causes, future results. So really, the past causes have kind of set the stage in a way for whatever is going to be experienced, and that's sort of out of your control in that particular moment. The next one, the present results, flow also without your control. Things have been laid in motion. You could imagine a kind of inertia of thought, of mind. I don't know if anyone has studied any kind amount of neuroscience, but synapses that wire together, fire together. It's really nerdy. But if you practice certain mind channels, it becomes a groove. There can be an idea like there's a road that's made of dirt and carts go along it, and the wheels will tend to form grooves in there, and the wheels will sink down into those grooves and keep going, keep going. Also happens with water, also happens while driving in snow, also happens in our minds. And these present results, this is really important, I think, you don't get to choose over. And I found that as I was studying this, I realized how much I'm not cognizing that well, because I think that I can have control over my feelings. I think I'm feeling bad. What do I need to do to not feel bad anymore? I'm feeling good. How do I keep this good feeling going? And I think that I can manipulate my sensory world, whatever crosses my field of vision, basically, whether that's my eyes or metaphorically, whatever I come into contact with, and I can directly work on my feelings. But this wheel is saying something different. It's pointing us around that says, we can have future results, which will be the birth and old age and death, and then through ignorance, that can all be rebirthed again and come around. And so, I think so often we think we can turn around, face our feelings, and just kind of like be a doctor on them. But actually, we need to nourish something that's much more forward-oriented than that. What we're receiving as feelings, as sensations, are the result of some intention we have done in the past. And now, our opportunity lies in how we face that. What do we do with that going forward? Not that we can take that and mess with it directly, but how we receive it has everything to do with how we go forward. So, a little example of that. There's a bug in your room. And you have a couple of choices of how to relate with that bug. And one that has kind of over the years more and more profoundly kind of disturbed me, actually, is with someone without thinking about it smashes the bug. I find it so kind of alarming. Sorry if any of you do this. I still like you. But I don't know what it is. And how I frame it in my mind is that there's a sense of dis-ease someone has with that. It's one thing if this is a dangerous animal that's in your room, right? And you have some real fear of harm for you or for others. That's one thing. But if it's just a sense of discomfort or a lack of control over your environment, and you have the power in that situation to remove that being's being, and you take that choice, how does that relate with the whole of your psychic and spiritual world? So in a sense, it's not just a bug. It's also a stance and a posture you take, I think you take towards everything small and uncomfortable in your life. If you have the power in that situation to just remove it, you're practicing that. That becomes your practice. Or you can also have the practice of getting something. I've now become quite accomplished at removing spiders. There are many tactics one can use, but you can take it, you can put it outside. Or this one I'm just now learning to become more comfortable with, you can just like let it be. And I used to even think it'd be like, okay, well I gotta put you in a better spot. Like, that's not a good spot. I get in there and I kind of mess with it a little bit. Or you could just let it be. And so these, if you kind of extrapolate that image out into all the different creepy crawly feelings that are going through us all the time, there's a vibrant interplay there that I think we're mostly unaware of. And I think meditation can be a place where you really start to study that. Kind of what are we doing with all the sensations here in our world? And when the cravings arise to either, I don't know, make a million of those feelings or to remove them, we can play with what results those things bring. And oftentimes when you try and get the things out or you try and kill them, for me it just makes me a little more paranoid. I don't know about you all, but it's continuing forward a sense of anxiousness, a sense of fear, a sense of separation and being watched and crawled over. So another place I want to point to, and I think we'll open up for more conversation here soon, is that in karma, the place of prime importance within this wheel is this break between, we have contact and feeling, and then you can see this present causes. The present cause really means your volition for all the sensation that will happen after. And sensation are the present results, which is your receiving body of your karma. That's what receives karma, and the thing that does karma is the present causes, so your volition. Kyogen Carlson has a nice bit on this in his karma section in there. And so here we have desire and craving, attachment, becoming. That's where you get to choose. And here we can have, you can make a choice either for craving or you can make a choice for path. And another word that's often put here is vow. So this becomes the life of a bodhisattva, a life of a being of awakening. It's said to be lived by vow, not by reactivity and craving, right? And so grasping as greed, hate, and delusion. And as I've been playing with that word delusion, I'm tending to enjoy denial and avoidance a bit more. Those have been speaking to me a bit more clearly. All the little ways I deny small realities that I actually think are true, but I, in the moment, just kind of obscure it or say, oh, I couldn't do that, or that's too much. Just in this one situation, I'm in a little bit of denial. Or path, which comprise of compassion, wisdom, generosity. And then two other words that are feeling alive for me there, and just as we think of this on kind of a course level, we'll talk more about path later, but also relinquishment. This is a word that's strongly thrown around with renunciation, but if you can imagine, you have an unpleasant feeling, and you decide that you're not going to jump to try and get rid of that. You're going to relinquish something. You're going to relinquish your agency to fix it. You're going to not, I came up with this. You see that you can't change it. You see that you can't change it, so you can accept it in a certain way. And that looks like just stopping. It looks like just stopping. You don't need to meddle with it at all. You can watch it change. And the other word is faith, because I think that really requires faith to do. So I remember how odd it was that I had to grow this faith that the spider wouldn't come stalk me in the night. And that it wouldn't like bite me all over the face or like crawl up my nose or something like that. I had to have this faith that that just wasn't going to happen. And maybe if it happens a couple times, you know, I change my posture. But so far, knock on wood, it hasn't happened. So. All right, so I think that's a lot. And I don't feel like I did a very good job of explaining that. So we have just a few minutes left. Of course, I talked longer than I wanted to. But anybody have any questions or comments that are bopping around for them in terms of karma, how that relates to the Four Noble Truths, where our sight of agency is within that?
Genjo.
Hi.
As you said, yes, that was a lot. But what is interesting to me is that like it seems like the place where many people place a lot of emphasis is such a tiny portion on this wheel, like birth and death. You know, it's like it's so small on the wheel of karma, and yet it seems to take up such a large part of what, at least my conception of what karma is. Like karma to me is like the process of birth and death alone. And so it's like just having this visual where it's like saying there's a whole, you know, majority of the pie not involving that part of it. I think it's very good food for thought, and it's a very rich place to open my mind to paying attention.
Yeah, it's interesting that language is really, it's really harped on as the, you know, the great matter is birth and death. And I guess it seems like that really is just a code word for, in a sense, I had mentioned this earlier in a couple of classes, the walking downstairs versus falling downstairs. That the great matter is how we meet those stairs. And that no matter what, our life is anicca and anatta. That profound instability is the very fabric of our life. And we can either roll around and kind of scream and make a mess of things, or we can meet that with a certain kind of uprightness and openness and acceptance. And that really matters for a human life.
And I think the other part of karma that used to confuse me, I mean, you used the terminology as yourself, was the idea of good and bad karma. Because I feel like those are kind of words that are still in suffering, like the idea of good and bad. To me, in my mind, they give rise to suffering because they present this, there's a better or lesser. And to me, like the liberation that I've been able to achieve through the Four Noble Truth has been the idea of a way that doesn't involve going towards good or bad. Is like a way where both good and bad are both present. And so it's like, I don't know how you label that. I think I realize like the convention of saying this is good. It's like for me, it's like there's one karma that goes, like you were saying, one goes.
Yeah. Can I jump in there, Daniel?
One goes towards cessation.
Yeah, this was actually, it was very difficult not to start to open up what you're talking about because of trying to bracket that for next week, but it's just so, I mean, it's bringing attention that's there for me is that so much of our teaching I feel like my teacher's teaching and also in Buddhism, we can focus on this karma to end karma, which we'll get to next week. But also, I think we have a tendency as Western Buddhists to jump to that a little too quickly. That really, in lots of the sutras, you're wishing many living beings to enjoy the celestial realms. So I've been beaten up on them a little bit, right? You can fall out of it and it sounds really tragic and it's frightening. But also, there's an aspect that's like, no, please just give stuff away and feel badass about that. Do that. That's such a good thing, and you will learn so much, and there will be a kind of liberation there. And the real I don't want to say the profound, but maybe we could say more profound work of kind of next level renunciation, when we see that even the heavenly being realms will not satisfy us. We need to hang out in those realms for quite a bit of time before we can start learning that next bit. And even the Buddha, before being reborn as the Buddha, he was spending a lot of times in those heavens and doing various kinds of learning and teaching in the kind of mythological stories.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have more questions, but I'll let someone else talk.
Pam?
Thank you. Yeah, just kind of going off what Daniel said, that I see this a lot in the balancing between the two extremes we have, and how we mentioned before that a lot of the teachings we focus on most in the West are this ceasing control and ceasing judgment and stop attaching so much importance to good and bad. But there's another side for those of us who tend more towards nihilism and everything's cool, doesn't matter, nothing's that important. To keep a focus on, there is a difference between good and bad, and there are things you do to increase suffering or to decrease suffering, and that matters.
Yeah. Totally. I couldn't say it any differently. But it's just amazing how for me, I think it reveals a kind of masculine and dominant energy that can flow through these teachings in a way that's not very skillful. It can be, I think, blind towards wanting to get to the good stuff a little too quickly. Yeah. Anyone else? We might have time for a couple more. Really? I mean, I have lots of questions. Maybe I'll present one last thing real quick to cap us off and give some homework. The great reveal. Maybe just kind of leave you with these words. Oh. Can people see that okay? Yeah, coming up on the screen. So this is the Verse of Atonement. That's chanted here a number of times on a regular basis and is incorporated with many ceremonies that will happen of all different flavors. All my past and harmful karma, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. It's usually done 3 times. One thing I didn't get to talk about here much tonight, but I really think it's maybe one of the most beautiful aspects of the teaching of karma, comes down to this word beginningless. Beginningless. Beginningless greed, hate, and delusion means it's not your fault. It's not your fault. But to fully avow for it brings something into your world of responsibility. And I think that in order to fully avow, in order to fully recognize and take responsibility, in a Buddhist sense, it also means this beginningless. And further, that beginningless, I think, also points us to a deep connection with the suffering of the world and not just our own suffering. And so a way I relate to this very quickly is developmental psychology. I was just learning about, there's a very simple, I don't know if it's a test, but a data set. It's called the ACE test or something like that. If you have a certain number of really difficult and traumatic events in your life, you are X amount likely to become an alcoholic or to use injected drugs. And it's really tragic that, for alcohol, it's this linear relationship, or it's a straight line. And then for injected drugs, it's parabolic. So if you get up to, I think, four 4 of these events, including like your spouses, or not your spouses, your parents are addicts, or you've been molested, or you've dealt with poverty, you've been attacked in some way or another, physically abused, that if those happen, you're much more likely to have these things come up in your life. And so that's not you that caused that, but actually it then becomes, it's in your karma, the way your volition that has entered your world of volition, and now it's your responsibility for yourself to work on integrating and healing that pain and that trauma. And as we do that, I believe it does that for the rest of the world too. That all of those energies that are moving through us, those attend to our wounds on the inside, and those also attend to everyone outside of us too.
I don't know what this word "vow" means.
I had to look it up today. It means to take responsibility for, basically, to recognize and admit fault. Yeah. I think in a way this word sums up Zazen really perfectly. Like, I think we're basically, for me, it's just recognizing the truth of this, like moment after moment, and letting things move through. As each image, each thing appears, kind of like, oh yes, that was not such a good thing. Ooh, I really like that. I could let that go. Moment by moment, like the light's coming in, the sensations are flowing through. How do I release needing to chomp down on my images of the world to feel whole, you know? And we'll close it there for tonight. We'll finish with the Pali refuges, in which maybe some of you don't know, but the chant we're doing, it's in Pali, and it means I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. For the second time, I take refuge in Buddha, take refuge in Dharma, take refuge in Sangha.